Chris, how are you today, sir?
Pretty good. How are you, Kurt?
I'm doing great, thank you. How's the weather up in Vermont?
It's been really uneven. We've had raw, rainy days. Today, though, is a peach, and I got to get outside after we finish here because it's going to be like 60 degrees and sunny.
Well, that
So,
sounds like a beautiful day. It's a tad bit warmer here, but I enjoy the cooler weather. It might not be cooler to you, but for us, it would be cooler if it was 60 degrees. That would be lovely weather for us. So,
yes, exactly.
so I was really glad to find you, and I went over the things that you had sent me, and you're quite the expert about Bigfoot. And you've written several books, and you've been featured on Animal Planet, and I was quite impressed with your resume there. How long have you been doing this?
Well, I've been seriously doing this for about 15 years. But ever since I was, I think, 10 years old, when I first saw the Patterson film, this species has captured my imagination. But it wasn't until about 15 years ago that I realized there was a way to systematically study the species. I always, before that, I thought you had to just be lucky and driving along the road and see one cross in front of you.
Right.
And back then, I thought, like most people still think, that the species is really just in the Pacific Northwest. But we've learned over the last, say, couple decades that it's pretty well distributed throughout the lower 48 and parts of Alaska and most of Canada. So people see them all over the place, and people collect tracks. They make casts of tracks from British Columbia down to the tip of Florida and everywhere in between. And these tracks show a very consistent cluster of traits, morphological, anatomical features. So it would take a conspiracy effort of unprecedented proportions for these all to have been planted, sometimes in the middle of nowhere, where there was no way to anticipate that someone would be walking there and would find them.
So are there I don't know if this is the correct term, but are there subspecies of Bigfoot? Like, we hear about Yeti and in Russia and in places like that. Are they all part of the Sasquatch family? Or are they separate, or
this
are
is
they
one
the
of the
same?
things. I mean, when you say that I'm a Sasquatch expert, I appreciate that, but there really are no experts, because what we don't know about the species is at least as much as what we do know. And one of the things we don't know is whether there are different species or whether there are different breeds of the same species. I mean, think about dogs. They're all the same species, but the variation in breeds
Right.
is immense. So we don't really know that, but we do know that people on almost all the continents except for Antarctica have their own long-standing history of this species living near and among them in the forest. And they have different names for them. In Australia, they're called the Yowie. In Russia, they're called the Yeren. In China, it's the Chinese word for wild man. In Scotland and the UK, they even have a long history of sightings there. And in Europe, for hundreds of years, people talked about werewolves in Europe. And it seems to me likely that many of those ideas were derived from encounters with this species. Because some Sasquatch have a little bit longer snouts, and they can look like what we think of by werewolves.
So what is a Sasquatch? What is a Bigfoot? Is it a primate? Is it human? Is it in
Yeah,
between?
it's a primate, and there's been a very successful, though little known, genetic study that was completed back in 2012 that found that the maternal part of the DNA is human, and the part that's both father and mother is unrecognizable. It's not human. It's not Neanderthal. It's not Denisovan or any of the other supposedly extinct varieties of human. And so the idea is that at some point in the past there was reproduction between females of our species and males of some primate species that's still not been identified.
Really?
So yeah, so they seem to be a hybrid of us and another primate within the Homo genus.
So where did this DNA come from? Could you, I mean, what did they get it from? Hair
That
or?
that for years there was a call by the woman who was leading this study, and she worked with many PhD geneticists also. Her name was Melba Ketchum, and she put out a call for years for people to submit what they believed were samples, organic samples, mostly hair, but also some blood samples, some fecal samples, some saliva samples left on an apple. And hundreds of them were submitted, and she picked the 109 that seemed the most likely to be authentic. And she sequenced all of those in terms of the maternal contribution, and that all came back human. And then the three best specimens or organic samples, she was able to do the whole genome, which is immensely more rich and complicated than just that female part, which is just in the mitochondria. And that's where she found that it was unprecedented and unrecognizable. So it's not reducible to just human, but it has human and primate and mammal in it, just like we have mammal and all sorts of animals in our ancient family tree that can be traced in our DNA. So so what was I saying? Oh, so there are many stories of how these samples were obtained. The blood sample, one of the best in the study, was obtained in a situation in Kentucky where a woman saw a juvenile Sasquatch off in the tree line about 150 feet away one day, and then began leaving out pancakes on a paper plate every night. And eventually this young one came up and started eating the pancakes, and she could tell that it was the thing that she had seen because it would sit on the bank of this catfish pond they had, and there was lots of mud and dirt there, and it would leave like handprints and actual butt prints, and the paper plate would be all shredded in the morning. So long story short, once this research group found out that she was having this interaction because she contacted this group, they came and obtained both infrared footage of this juvenile eating the pancakes, and they also, this is a little bit off color, but they also superglued some shards of glass to the paper plate and put pancakes on top of it, and then the next morning they had a lot of blood on the pieces of paper. They used that in the DNA study. I'm sure he healed up.
Right, yeah. I was going to say, that's kind of harsh.
But still, it is harsh. It is harsh. That's kind of like extraordinary means to get scientific knowledge.
Right. So the obvious question is going to be, is that if this lady's saying out pancakes and she's having this interaction, and she knows that this juvenile Sasquatch is showing up for her pancakes every day or every night, why not video it? Why not have a video camera out there,
because
record
because she was a poor Kentucky woman, and this only happened at night. There are places, hundreds of them, maybe more, that are called habituation sites that are kind of like Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey, where they were able to habituate their chimpanzee and gorilla groups just to reduce the fear and the sort of distance between, so that they could watch these groups. But in the case of Sasquatch, you can't just sit there watching them. They won't come around in the daytime. They only come around at night. And you can see them often peeking out from behind a tree in the moonlight at night. But, the only way that they have been able to accomplish what they have over the centuries and millennia in terms of not being discovered by us and dominated by us and treated like we did the Native Americans, is by being far better at eluding us than we can even imagine.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for just a second. Like, how many years, like hundreds of years, has there been these recordings of Bigfoot or Sasquatch or some sort of this huge creature throughout history?
Recordings, you mean accounts?
Yeah, accounts. Yes.
Well, there's a anthology of newspaper articles called uh, Big Newsprint, I think, or Bigfoot. I forget what it's called. Darn it. By um, Scott McLean. So you guys can look that up. You in the audience here, and it contains newspaper articles from the late 1700s all the way up through the present. Of people back in the day, they just called them like ape men or wild men, and villages would be for a period of time terrorized by sightings of this creature, and they would sometimes go off, they get a posse together and go off with torches, you know, and try
Right.
to track it down. But of course, this species is much faster, larger, stronger than we are, so they weren't able to just, you know, lasso it. But reports of essentially the same, I mean, exactly the same species go back hundreds of years in this country, and thousands of years in terms of European reports, and then thousands of years in terms of Native American oral traditions. All but a small handful of the groups of Native Americans in North America have this figure, this character, this fellow. Most of them think of it as a fellow human, a different kind of human, which indeed it is. So they all have their different names for it. There are hundreds and hundreds of names in Native American languages for this same creature.
So, do you think like where again? So I think the biggest issue that people have that want to believe, like myself, someone asked me this week because I told them I was going to have you on the show, and they asked me, "Well, do you believe in Bigfoot?" And I said, "You know, I don't know that I believe in Bigfoot. I want to believe in Bigfoot. I want to, you know, I want to believe that there's something like that out there, you know, and I just think it would be amazing if there really was. But I can't negate the fact that over all these years that we have one really good video of Bigfoot, which is the Patterson film, which we'll talk about here momentarily, and that's the only film in all these years and that we really have a clear, definite, you know, recording of Bigfoot walking, and you know, with all the wildlife photographers and people out there nowadays who, like, if you watch any of the documentaries that they have on Netflix and stuff of animals doing things in the middle of the night, it's just it's absolutely amazing the shots that they get and the video they get. And I'm going, how is it that Bigfoot has eluded us even in this day and age where everybody has a camera, you know? I mean,
I know it's a great question. I'll just refer you. There are some other authentic videos besides the Patterson film. I'd refer you to the Paul Freeman footage. I mean, you can look this up later. But
Okay.
there's the Paul Freeman footage. There's a few years ago there was an excellent one called the Mississippi skunk ape footage, where there's this Sasquatch squatting down by a tree and pulling it apart to get at some honey combs within the tree. And it's just the strength of this thing is awesome, and it's pretty clear video. So we can look for that. Look also for the Memorial Day footage.
Memorial Day footage. Okay.
Yeah, and there are others too that I could refer you to. But the idea is that they conceal. They almost always are behind something. So there's hundreds of photographs and videos where you can't really be sure, and those we call blob squatches. You may be familiar with that term, or people listening to this maybe. It's where, you know, yeah, it could be something, but you can't tell. Well, that's because this is their behavior. They're behind things. The one Native American name for this species translates the stand behind, because that's so integral to their nature. And one way I think of it is either they don't exist, in which case the tens of thousands of eyewitness reports of sightings of them, many by people who don't even want their names given because they fear ridicule, they're all false. Or if even one of them is true, then probably most of them are true because it means the species is real.
Right.
So even, you know, and if it does exist, then they can only have evaded capture and discovery and even human belief in them by being far more skilled and ninja-like than we can even conceive of. Those are the
So
only two options.
so I have a question. And with the Paul, because I haven't seen this Paul Freeman one or the Mississippi skunk. The
Ape.
ape. Okay, if these are as clear and as prominent as the Patterson film, why hasn't there been more recognition? Why doesn't mainstream media pick this up and said, "Hey, look"? I mean, to me, that would seem like the kind of news that you would go, "This is earth-shattering news here." It's like we have more proof that there's something out there that
Because the Patterson film is already 100, in my mind, 100% persuasive. And anything less than that is going to suffer by comparison. And so if people aren't, if people in the mainstream culture and science aren't persuaded by the Patterson film, then they're kind of numb to everything that's not as good, And
right.
I have a video on YouTube that I'd like to point people to called "The Patterson Film: Everything You Need to Know to Be 100% Convinced." And you may have seen that because I linked you to it.
You
But I
linked
have
it.
clips in there where there's different angles of analysis of this film, and it's hard. I find it impossible to argue with. But Kurt, you may have a different.
No, I'll tell you what happened is that I had heard, as I talked to you when I had called you about the fact that I heard the Patterson film had been debunked. And you said, no, that's not the case. And you sent me the link to it. I watched it. Now, having been a personal trainer for many, many years, and that's, that's my passion, my love. It's what I've done for probably close to 40 years.
Wow.
I understand how muscles work. And I never looked at the Patterson film quite as closely as this link that you sent me, as the person who was breaking everything down shows. And I was like impressed with you can actually see the calf muscles, can see the glute muscles, you can see things that I never really noticed before, because again, I just looked at it just from watching on TV and not really examining it. And who was it who broke that down?
Well, mostly it's the work of M.K. Davis.
Okay,
He's done the great work. So if you look on YouTube, Patterson Film, M.K. Davis, and you'll just have a month's worth of videos to watch.
Yeah, if anyone just watches it and just looks at the muscle and how they're working when this Sasquatch is walking, you can see the muscles actually working as it's moving and going.
And we can't even create as naturalistic a suit today, much less in 1967.
No, you can't.
All you really would need to look at is two things: her right calf that you're talking about. I mean, her right leg. Right. It has a gracilis tendon, which is the thing that you can reach down and feel under your knee right now. There's two tendons, one on the right, one on the left, under your knee, stretching back on either side of your hamstring. And she has those clearly.
Yeah.
She has calf muscles. She has hamstring, and then her breasts. If you were going to make a suit, it would be miserably difficult. It would be as hard to make realistic looking breasts that move around as she walks as it would be to make the whole rest of the suit.
Yeah, and again,
why would you choose to do that?
That's not something I had ever noticed before. And so again, M.K. Davis did a great job in breaking this down and showing it the way it should have been shown, and it is. And even with the gait, with the 52-degree angle of how we walk compared to the 73-degree, and that's a huge difference. And when you watch the guy, and I even tried it myself, I was like, yeah, you just can't do it. It's not a natural thing. And so
and in this video, there's another guy who's done great work named Thinker Thunker is his YouTube handle, and he's the one you're referring to with showing the angle of shin rise
right.
On the steps of the gate. And what was I going to say? Well, keep talking and I'll think of it. So,
and then also talking about the length of the arm and the legs, human, and the fact
proportions.
The portions. And he showed, when you had someone like Bruce Lee compared to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the percentages were the same. And yet it's not on the Patterson film with that Sasquatch. It's not even close.
In our species, our legs are much longer than our arms, and in Sasquatch, the legs are just a tiny bit longer than our arms. So that's one way you can separate the wheat from the chaff if you see a purported Sasquatch video. You can just, if you get a clear enough view, you can home in on those proportions. What I was going to say that I just forgot is that the guy who claimed to have worn the suit,
Right.
and everybody who doesn't look at this longer than 5 minutes, this issue of the Patterson film thinks, oh yeah, some guy said he was in the suit, so I don't have to think about it. Well, he tried to replicate the walk, and as you saw in that video,
Right.
he miserably failed to do so.
Yeah, he had the arms down, but I also thought it was great how they showed what how he would have to be built to be able to pull that off anyway. So I thought it was
right.
It was.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people who are out there and want to know more about the Patterson film, or are on the fence, or don't even know, haven't even looked at it carefully. If you look at this video where I put together various excellent analysts, and again, it's called the Patterson Film. Everything you need to know to be 100% convinced. I guess it'll be linked below. See if it doesn't persuade you.
Yeah, well, and that's, again, I think that's what people should do, is look at things from, instead of just shutting it down,
Right.
which we all tend to do, especially things that we consider conspiracy theories or things of that nature. And the funny thing is that people who believe in UFOs, who said they've seen UFOs, who filmed UFOs, and now the government has finally come out and said, we have film of UFOs. I will be surprised if one day they come out and go, oh, we have film of Bigfoot. So.
Well, not only do they have film, but we're pretty sure they have bodies, and they know a lot about it, and they're trying to, there's all sorts of reasons why they would like to suppress this reality. It would be a convulsive realization that to know that we have a fellow human, like a wild version of us, living near us in the woods.
So what do you think the main reason would be for withholding that information? I mean, I have my theory, but.
You remember the spotted owl?
Yeah.
You may be old enough to remember that. That was this species of owl in the Northwest, a cute little owl, and it shut down the entire timber industry up there. And I think it was either Washington or Oregon for a while, because it was an endangered species. And that's just one little owl. Just think if it's acknowledged and accepted and recognized that there's this humanoid species all over the United States and Canada, not just in one little region in the Northwest, the impact that would have on industry, timber, mining, national parks, and just the very self-image of us as a species would be forever transformed by this realization. And, governments, in my view, the main one of the main priorities of governments is to keep the status quo, to keep control and social order, and to maintain the entrenched power structure and economic system that's in place. And this would threaten all of that on many different fronts. I think there's plenty of impetus for them to keep it from us.
Well, one of my things I believe is that I guess it's around 70% of this country, they view themselves as Christians. And so with the Christian religion, we're supposed to be at the top of the food chain, that we were made in God's image. And so, and a lot of the Christian religions don't believe, I would say probably the majority of them don't believe in evolution. They just believe that we were made like that from God made us out of dirt or whatever it was, and Eve was made from our ribs. And so to show that there's this evolution that's actually out there and alive right now, I think would shake them to their core. It's just like with UFOs. Even with the government releasing the UFOs, they said they were very careful not to say these are extraterrestrials. They're just UFOs. We just don't know where they came from.
Just don't know. They're just unidentified. Yeah.
Right.
So there's not much threat. There's not much threat in that, because whereas with this, it would be part and parcel with the revelation of this species would be that we do know what they are, and they fly in the face of so many people's pieties and enshrined belief systems.
And what I find funny is that, again, you can have people who sit there and they'll sit there and go, oh, people who believe in Bigfoot are crazy. People who believe in UFOs are crazy. And these are the same people who believe in some magical man in the sky, that they're going to come back. And I go, how do you rationalize believing in some invisible man up in the sky that you're going to go back to live with, when you die, and yet you can't believe in UFOs or Bigfoot, even though there's far more evidence that those exist than some guy in the sky. So,
yeah, I'm with you. I don't really understand that either, but I think the other side would have some compelling answers for that. But
oh, I'm sure they would. They'll say, "Oh, there's proof that he's around in all things." But
right.
it's funny how they'll look at people like you and go, "Oh, those guys are crazy," but they don't think that what their beliefs are crazy at all. It's sort of like, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, but Zeus and Hera and
I know.
all that. But those were,
And they don't understand being an atheist, but of course,
right,
Christians are atheists when it comes to all other gods. So
right,
they should
exactly.
understand what it's like to be atheist because they participate in that, except that one God.
Yeah, it's funny how our belief systems will, justify things with to say our beliefs are right and everyone else is wrong. And so, again, when you think that way, I think it's very challenging for people to be open-minded to the possibilities of things like Bigfoot walking around and being able to exist. I will say again that I think the biggest issue with it, and let me tell you this, I also believe that it doesn't matter, like you said, it doesn't matter what kind of evidence you come up with. You could come up with a Bigfoot that's standing right next to you and talks to you and says, "My name's Doug," like on the on the Geico commercial,
Yeah.
and they still won't believe it. So there's people out there who's going to. It doesn't matter if there's evidence that's in front of them. And
Well, at the extremes of self-enclosed cynicism, they won't believe it. But if they're not cynics but skeptics, which is the healthy,
right.
intellectually rigorous way to be, if there were concrete proof, I think it would persuade a lot of people. Just not the most extreme.
Right, exactly. The ones who their belief systems aren't changing no matter what.
They're set
Right,
in stone, and that's it.
right.
Yeah.
So again, so what I guess my biggest thing is that we can never seem to find any bones or anything like that, like we do of all other creatures out there. You would think at some point we would have found a skeleton of a Bigfoot, and I know that you have found even imprints of footprints and things of that nature. I mean, where do they live? Where are they hiding out that they can evade us to the point of, even in the daytime, like where do they sleep so that we're not walking up on them while they're sleeping? Or
Well, the first issue is about bones, and that is always an understandable question. But two things: they live almost exclusively in forested areas, and forest soil is very acidic and filled with microbes, and so it's not at all conducive to forming like fossils. So on the fossil side, in Africa, it wasn't until 2005 that the first fossil of a chimpanzee ancestor was found, and we know they exist
really?
because again, it's a forest environment. If you're going to have fossil formation, it's going to be in an arid environment. It's going to be just a perfect storm of circumstances where some creature falls to its death, like down in a crevice where there's water coming through, so the bones can get mineralized with the minerals in the water. Because fossils aren't the actual bones; they're a mineral version of the bones. It's kind of like a carbon copy. And otherwise, the bones get consumed by nature. By porcupines eat bones, and then the little bugs come and just eat it.
Right.
So, but in terms of
Yeah.
why we don't find bodies lying around, dead bodies, I often flip it around and say, why don't they find our bodies lying around? Because we take care of our bodies. And if they're as smart as they would have to be to accomplish what they do, they must know that leaving bodies lying around is not going to help their cause. So who knows what they do? Do they eat them? Do they bury them? There are reports of people seeing them far off, digging and burying. But those aren't confirmed reports. So we just don't know. That's in the basket of things we don't know.
So
But
are they smart enough to use tools? I mean, they use
they use
tools.
tools all the time because they knock on trees.
Okay.
But in terms of building with tools, they don't need to because they have these massive hands, and they, all higher primates manipulate their environment and build things. Us, we do, of course, and gorillas make nests and trail markers, and so do chimpanzees. So it would be shocking if Sasquatch didn't do that. And in fact, people all around North America and in other parts of the world find these stick and tree structures. And some of them could conceivably be made by people, Boy Scouts and bushcrafters, but some are of a kind that they're not for shelter, and they're huge, and they're more aesthetic, like a sculpture. Um, there are lots of these that people can find just in forests near them. In a forest, I'm looking out the window, I can almost see the forest where I found lots of them here next to where I live in the capital of Vermont, which is Montpelier. But the thing is, once you find these structures, you can't, of course, conclude that they're made by Sasquatch. You have to then do audio taping night after night after night. And then you can hear, eventually they come back around. See, they're like nomads. They don't stick in one place, because if they did, they'd be easily discoverable. They circulate. And so once you find their structures, if you then confirm through audio taping that it's probably them, because you hear their vocals, you hear them knocking at 3:15 in the morning, and it's obviously a sound made by something with hands smashing something against a tree. So either there's people out there doing that, and building these outlandish tree structures, or it's Sasquatch. And this might be a good time to play that clip if the producer wants to.
Put the sounds of all the noises from the.
Yeah,
Okay.
that clip up till the 4:33 mark.
Yeah, and I listened and for everyone to let them know, I listened to it earlier, and since I'm not well versed in technology, I'm not quite sure how to put this in, so I'm going to let Eddie put this in at this point, so that so everyone can listen to those sounds as well, and make your own judgment on it.
So a lot of people don't take that second step and do audio recording, but you have to in order to pretty much verify what you're looking at, what you're talking about.
Right. So then why not the video recording? Because again, there's audio recording that you have of these footsteps and noises around your house at 3:45. Why not have video with that?
Because first of all, it's expensive to have night vision video. Second of all, thousands of Sasquatch researchers have tried trail cameras all across North America and the world, and they just don't seem to work. One of the other things that we don't know, in the huge basket of things we don't know, is how they are aware of the presence of cameras, but they avoid them. And I'm reminded of, I can't remember if it was African folks or Native Americans, who maybe both, who hated having their pictures taken by Westerners or by colonists, because they felt that having their picture taken would be like stealing their soul.
Yeah, Native Americans felt that way.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, you can't explain that directly as a link to Sasquatch, because we haven't talked to them about and shown them pictures and stuff, so
right.
It's not the same. But there's some kind of deep impulse in that same direction, and we don't know why, but it's just the case. There are a few successful examples of trail cameras that have worked, and I can point people to that. There's an M.K. Davis video, actually, that's not about this Patterson film, but about another situation that took place in Texas, where a trail camera videotaped the face of a Sasquatch coming right up to the lens. And it's called M.K. Davis Discusses the Eye in the Lens video.
Wow.
And so you can photograph them and videotape them every now and then. When I was on Finding Bigfoot, it was because I had obtained thermal footage, which is just a heat signature of a Sasquatch spying on me and some friends by a big bonfire in East Texas. at the home of a woman who had had them coming around her place 99% of the time at night when you couldn't see them clearly for years. And that's why I went there and made friends with her, and she let me stay there, and had a lot of great experience there. And one of them was filming this Sasquatch, and the video is on YouTube called The Woodpile Sasquatch.
That's the one that was featured on Animal Planet, right?
Yeah, you know, if you remember that show, they would have one piece of purported evidence that they would kind of build the show around. That's why they would go to a certain spot in the country, right, and have a town hall meeting there and stuff. So in that episode, it was my piece of footage, and so they came down, and the three guys thought it was authentic because it is authentic. But of course, Renee thought, well, it could be a person.
Right. Well, you know, it was, again, I was looking at it, and at first I thought this is like a sonogram. Like, you know, when a woman's pregnant and they go, see, there's the baby, and I look at those sonograms, I go, I don't see a baby.
I know. It's like a Rorschach test.
Right, yeah. So, but I did see, I once they described it, I did actually see the formation of something, you know, that was definitely, you know, that was certainly there. So it was funny, but I was like,
yeah, I know that happened. It's hard because, again, this is the perfect example. They almost invariably and immaculately have something in between them and us.
Right.
So in this case, it breaks up her image, and you can't tell what it is unless you just start to explain it to people, and all of a sudden it either pops into an aha moment, or else people just can't see it. But in this case, people listening may wonder, well, why didn't you go, you know, get a close-up of her? Well, I didn't realize it at the time. I would just go away from the fire every now and then and scan the wood line with my thermal camera. And I saw at the time a horizontal little bar of light, which means heat. But I thought, I rationalized it in the moment, thinking, well, I'm looking for something upright, you know, right, enormous and upright. And this looks like a piece of metal or a rock that has retained the heat from the day. So I didn't pursue it, and I kicked myself every day since then. And this was like 11 years ago. But so, when I came back to Vermont and reviewed the footage, you can see the hand is going like that at the end of a piece of lumber. And then when I adjusted the contrast, suddenly, boom, these two big eyes popped out in close proximity to that arm and that hand, looking through this chink in the lumber pile, spying on us at the campfire.
So I have to, all right, so this brings me to another question. Like, if you're out in the woods and there's an 8-foot creature walking around, do you not get scared at all? Because I'm a pretty big guy, and I can tell you right now, if there's a bear or a creature out there that's 8 feet tall that I know could just rip you from limb if they felt like it, I'd be going, yeah, I don't know if I'd want to be out there not that late at night.
The thing is, lots of people have encounters with them, and there are very, very few reports of them being aggressive. They'll try to intimidate you. They'll scream at you. They'll push down a big, healthy tree, and it's like a bomb going off. It's like,
and that would work. I'd go, okay.
In most cases, it works like a charm. People run scared shitless out of that woods. And you feel, you know, rationally, you know, if they wanted to kill me, they could have.
Right.
And you can also intellectually explain to yourself that their prime directive is to continue to exist and be secluded. And if they started killing people, that would bring more people, and it would just be, you know, counterproductive. But then the little voice inside your head says, well, what if one, you know, has a brain tumor, or is insane, you know, right, or has emotional problems, or was like abused by his father and needs to lash out? You don't know. So it's a scary situation for sure. And there are reports of them killing people.
There's
one very credible report that I was told by the woman in East Texas, where I got the thermal footage of two guys who were fishing in a canoe on a river in a different part of Texas. And one guy, they saw a juvenile Sasquatch looking thing on the bank digging for mussels. And when it saw them, it ran into the forest. And this guy said, I'm going to go get it. And he grabbed his rifle, and he goes wading over to the bank, and he runs off into the forest. And the other guy's just sitting there waiting and listening, and 20 minutes go by. And all of a sudden he hears this gunshot. And then silence. And 20 more minutes go by, and 45 minutes go by, and finally he says, shit. And he gets out of the canoe, and he goes and he follows the guy's trail through the thick foliage and undergrowth. and he finds his friend with his head jacked back on his spine, like dead.
Ouch.
So if you get between one of their children and them, they're not going to be so docile.
Right. Well, that's with any animal, just about.
Yeah.
That's it. I never heard that. I didn't know anyone was ever killed
I
by.
mean, that's not a widely distributed story. It's just one that I heard from somebody who knows this credible source, and she herself is credible and proved that to me over the years.
So when the autopsy was done, how did they rule the death? Did they say that it was a bear or something?
Well, they said a lot of strength would have been taken, but I've told you all I know about that story.
Okay, all right. That's interesting. I didn't know about that. So these animals, you said they're nomads, so it's hard to find, to pin them down and find where they live, unlike gorillas, because I was going to ask you, well, we can find gorillas, they build nests and they live there, but that's because they stay in one place. So these animals are nomads and they're always foraging for food. So what are they eating? Do you know? Or
well,
besides pancakes. So.
Yeah, besides those pancakes, they're omnivores. People see them killing and eating deer. There are many reports of them. There's reports of guys up in hunting platforms who see them like catching, especially in the South in Texas, catching hogs. And one report of a Texan up in his hunting what do you call it? Not a blind, not a platform.
Yeah, I know.
Hunting,
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
30 feet up a tree, sitting there, and he sees a Sasquatch carrying a live squealing hog, and then he grabs it by his legs and bam, bam on the ground, and then he puts it under his arm and walks off. So, and they eat a lot of foliage too. I mean, they manipulate trees, and you see lots of trees that are stripped of their branches and their leaves, and lots of times stripped of their bark. And we know that bark contains lots of nutrients and minerals and lots of medicinal properties. Like aspirin comes from, I think it's willow bark.
Okay.
So they eat anything. And there are, believe it or not, there are reports of them dumpster diving.
Really?
And again, you think, well, then you ought to be able to get video of that. Well, people aren't all set up and like programmed to capture video. And once you do, once the scavenger Sasquatch realizes that his little routine and his situation has been compromised, well, he's not going to come back. So, they're very, very shrewd, and they know how to avoid us. As I say, either they don't exist, in which case all this mountain of evidence, including what I forgot to mention, is thousands of plaster casts of tracks that were found in the middle of nowhere, from British Columbia down to Florida and California up to Maine. All these tracks, which share a very tight array of traits, including a mid-tarsal hinge where their feet go like that, like gorilla feet and chimpanzee feet, and unlike our feet, which have a fixed arch. All these traits are found in these tracks, thousands of them, all over not only North America, but the same kind of morphology and anatomy is found in tracks in Russia and Australia, et cetera, et cetera. Either all that is not true,
right,
or they do exist, and so they've existed. They've co-evolved with us since the reproduction event, and they've mostly reproduced then with their own groups. So they're not as close to human as they were originally when they were 50-50. And they know how. They just are expert at doing what they do and not being captured by either physically or intellectually by us. I mean, in terms of our accepting their existence on a wide scale in our culture.
Well, that tells you they're not all human, because if they were, the juveniles would be having Instagram accounts and taking pictures of themselves all the time and posting them on Instagram.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because you're joking, but the juveniles are a lot less inhibited. Not to that extent, but a lot of times juvenile children have encounters with juvenile Sasquatch, because the latter are less frightened of us than the adults are, and they haven't learned all the lessons and So there are many stories of kids who, like, their soccer ball goes off into the woods and they go to get it, and there's a little hairy kid looking at them, and they stare at each other, and then the human says, you know, what's your name? And the hairy kid runs away, and the human kid says, wait, and that's it. But they never forget it for the rest of their life.
I hope to God that they don't have like a Sasquatch Kim Kardashian out there who's going to do a sex tape or something.
I wouldn't mind seeing that, actually. I don't want to see Kim. I don't want to see Kim, but I wouldn't mind seeing one of those. A hairy.
One day we might see that happen, and then that'll just blow the lid off of all of this. So.
That would work. That would work.
And yeah. So again, you made mention the fact that these are all over the world. In fact, in Florida, I forget what it's called. They call it the swamp something or another. And
I think it's skunk ape, which is the same name that
skunk ape. That's it. Yeah.
Mississippi video, the Mississippi skunk ape. They call them the same thing. I think throughout the South because they stink.
Yeah, that's what I was told. They stink. So
yeah. And there's a great Florida researcher that you yourself should look up, and our audience should look up, named Mark Zaske.
Mark Zaske?
His Patreon channel is Crypto Reality, one word.
Crypto Reality. Okay. I'll take a look at that. Do you ever find it frustrating, because you said you've been doing this for 15 years, and do you ever find it frustrating that, you know, after 15 years you don't have something more solid, like, you know, almost like a picture with your arm around Bigfoot or something?
Well, I wouldn't have expected that, but what I did hope for realistically was better video. I videotaped that one in East Texas, and I also videotaped a small one in Vermont, just a few miles from my house in a ravine, and people can find that. It's called Morning Visits, the juvenile Sasquatch footage. And in both cases, I didn't realize what I was filming, what was in front of me, until later when I saw the video, when I reviewed the footage. And in both cases, I kicked myself really, really hard for not noticing what it was and pursuing it. And I would have gotten footage, at least in the case of the juvenile footage in Vermont, it was daytime, it was morning, so I would have had footage at least as good as the Patterson film.
So do you think, I mean, honestly, so you know about this guy who had his head ripped back, who went chasing a Bigfoot, and if you had seen this juvenile Bigfoot, you would have went chasing it after knowing what could happen?
Yeah, that's a good point. There was a steep hill right behind where he was, so I assume he would have climbed up the hill, and I would not have climbed after him. I would have just filmed the heck out of him.
Right.
But he was only like 4 feet tall. He was behind a little pine tree, and he was just watching me. And a YouTube viewer actually pointed out, said, "What's that little black head looking at you?" And then when I enhanced the contrast, you can see his body behind the tree, and he was just watching me. And oddly enough, at the very time that he was there, a coyote was howling on the top of the ridge, and then ran down to within 40 feet of me and stood there looking at me, as though to distract me from the fact that this juvenile was there. And many people, and I too, have recorded the chorus of coyote calls and then a deep guttural howl at the same time. And, you know, oh, in the midst of like coyotes. And we think that they're collaborator species, where like the coyote hunt will be accompanied by the Bigfoot, and then the Sasquatch will help himself to with the coyotes down and maybe throw them some scraps, just like dogs and us.
Oh, well, that would make sense.
They seemed, in this video I just referenced, they seem to have been working together to distract me from noticing this juvenile Sasquatch there.
Well, again, I'll make sure all your links are posted in this YouTube at the bottom of this YouTube video, as well as on the podcast as well. So that way people can take a look at all these, because I really want people to look at the evidence. And again, this isn't to convince or anything else. It's just to say, look at it from a different perspective, and then make an informed decision, rather than just say, oh, dismiss it just because it sounds unreasonable to you.
Right. That's being a skeptic rather than a cynic.
Right. So
And if people are readers more than video watchers, then I do have my most recent book that may be of interest to you is called Next of Kin, Next Door: How to Find Sasquatch a Stone's Throw Away.
so how many books have you written about Sasquatch?
5.
5 books?
Yeah.
And where can you find those books?
They're all on Amazon under
They're all
my
on
name.
Amazon?
So if you just search Amazon or Google Christopher Noël and books, you'll find them. I have a book it's called A Field Guide to Sasquatch Structures that goes through the 50 most common types of structures that people find. And at this point, Eddie, you might want to splice in some photos of Sasquatch structures. Just scroll through just by Google imaging the page called Bigfoot Stick and Tree Structures. You'll find lots of images of them in there, including, as I look at this now, including the front cover of my field guide book.
And your field guide book?
Yeah, A Field Guide to Sasquatch Structures.
Okay, gotcha.
If he feels like featuring that cover in this section here.
Yeah, while we're talking, he can splice the structures in there instead of looking at us. You can see the structures.
Looking at us, our ugly face.
Exactly. Well, like I said, one day I may become technically savvy enough to put these in myself at the time that we're doing it.
Out of a job.
I'm the guy that likes to talk, and Eddie takes care of the rest of it for me. So I'm very thankful for Eddie. He does a great deal for me. Otherwise, it wouldn't turn out nearly as well. So he's much appreciated. So I have to ask you this, and you probably know where this is going.
Here we come.
Are you married, or you have a girlfriend, a boyfriend, anything? Or
no, I have a wonderful 13-year-old daughter.
Okay, so
but in fact, her mother and my relationship did suffer from my Bigfoot research.
Did it really?
That was one reason we didn't last.
Is it because she doesn't believe in Bigfoot, or is it because you spent too much time?
There's lots of people who think, which is baffling to me. They think, yeah, it's probably real, but I don't really care.
Right.
There's a huge cross section of people who are in that camp, and so she's kind of in that camp. But it was mostly the fact that I spent money on going around the continent on these expeditions instead of buying things that we needed.
Yeah, that will tend to upset.
Yeah.
The reason I asked that is because I'm sure you're aware of the comment Joe Rogan made after he had been out searching for Bigfoot.
Such a fruitful comment. Let's go into that. Yes.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, why don't you tell them what Joe Rogan had said about people who go out the guys who are out searching for Bigfoot?
Did he use the white guys part too? It wasn't just.
Because he I don't remember exactly, but I think he said something about you never see brothers out doing this. This is just a white guy kind of thing. So
yeah, so for white guys, unfuckable white guys.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm extremely fuckable, and
you have a 13-year-old daughter to prove that.
It's just an ignorant comment. I mean, I say you have to separate the wheat from the chaff, and there are loony people that are attracted to this any fringe topic like
right.
this, flat earthers, and there's a lot more rational people, I want to say, in the Sasquatch research community than flat earthers are. But hey, that's just me. Maybe they'll turn out to be right. I think they should all elect a spokesperson and gather money and have them go up in a spaceship and look and report back. Anyway, what was I saying?
About Joe Rogan's comment. And I think, and I'm sure Joe meant it in jest. I mean, obviously, he's a comedian. That's what he does. He says absurd things.
But there is a problem of a lack of diversity in Sasquatch research. There's a really, really good African-American, 2 really good researchers that I can refer people to. One guy's named Deedoss, Deedoss, and he's down, I believe, in Louisiana. And then a Pennsylvania researcher named Jeff Friend, and they're both on all over YouTube. So look into them. But there's something culturally too about a smaller per capita, participation in camping and hunting among African Americans. I'm not sure why, but
Well, you know, the funny thing is I have an episode that's called the Gray Zone, because not everything's black and white. And I had a guest on, his name is Teddy Fresh, and we talked about that. It's like, why don't brothers like going camping? He goes,
yeah.
because we don't want to get eaten. So he's like,
Yeah, well, that's smart. That's smart. I mean, I've even heard theories where it goes back to the the bad old days when running around in the woods was not was not good, because there's going to be white men off trying to capture you. Of course, that's not quite the case now, but it might be a sort of heritage memory.
right.
I don't.
Well, and also too, blacks tend to be more what's the word, spiritual, and so they believe in the spiritual world, and so
You got to be careful there, my friend.
no,
That's
this
a stereotype.
no, this is coming from him. So I'm
Well,
just,
he might be participating in an oversimplified stereotype too. But anyway.
well, it is, and it's a generalization, of course. But there's plenty of videos out there to kind of back it up. You'll see a group of black guys, and some the guy who's walking up on them acting like he's a zombie, and the whole group just runs. Now these are guys who, like, if it was 10 guys walking up on him and only one black guy, he's going to sit there and fight. But if it's something that looks like it's supernatural, they're like,
no. Actually, I've heard like Chris Rock make a lot out of that kind of thing too. So there's something to that.
right, yeah. So and so it's not it's not a generalization. It's made as far as being a mean spirit or anything. It's just fun, and yeah, there was a lot of that.
Like you can find Looney Tunes in any subject, but a higher percentage of them in a subject that still hasn't gained general recognition, or hasn't gained a sense of respectability in all quarters. So yeah, there's idiots in the Sasquatch realm, and there's if you've seen that show Bigfoot Hunters, you have these rednecks out there trying to kill them one. There's, so you can of course find idiots, but I like to think I'm a relatively reasonable person, and so and I have a daughter, so I guess I'm by definition fuckable.
Right. At least once.
At least one time, 13 years ago. 14. So, but I mean, that's just an incendiary thing to say, and he hasn't spent any sincere time looking into the topic, so you don't have to take it that seriously.
Right. Well, then I'm glad that you talked about it, because again, it's the
elephant in the room.
Right. And it's something that there's a lot of people, because he made that comment, they're like, oh yeah, that's what the kind of guys are out there. And again, I don't think that's true. I think that the majority of people who are out there, like yourself, are intelligent guys who have this curiosity that wants to know, and that's why you do the research that you do, because you want to find the answers, and and you have to be intelligent to have that thought process. And it's much easier just to go, oh, I don't care. That's the
right. Well, later today or tomorrow, I'm going to post a new video called "What Makes Sasquatch Fascinating." So you can there's no link yet, but you can look it up if you want to. If Eddie wants to look it up, it'll be up by at least Sunday, and you can link to it then if people want to watch that.
Why don't you send me the link? Because this show, even though today's Saturday, it will go up on Monday.
Okay. I'll send you the link. I'll write that down.
Okay. Yeah. Send the link, and we'll go ahead and we'll put that on the show as well at the bottom for the YouTube channel.
Thank you, Kurt.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Listen, I want to put it out there and give people all the information that they can gather before making a decision. And after listening to this episode or watching this episode, they may not change their mind, or they may not know what to think at the time, but at least now they have more information to come to some sort of decision as to where they're leaning.
And they can go forward and dig
right,
further.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's important in every area of our life. I think that's important that we keep an open mind about things, and at least look at the information that's given to us, instead of shutting the information down before we even look at it and just go, nope, I just don't believe in that. And
And I bet you that's the guiding spirit behind the Powers Project.
You're absolutely correct. That's exactly what the spirit of this show is. And again, I don't think, and when I tell people, look, challenge your beliefs and challenge your perceptions, because it will change your reality. It really does. When you change your belief, you change your perception, you change your reality, but you have to challenge them. And too many people are afraid to challenge their beliefs and their perceptions, and so that's why the reality never changes. That's why the world never changes, and they don't know why they're stuck where they're stuck. And until we're able to be open-minded about things and not just shut things down, because that's what we were taught to do, to like you said, be cynical about things and not even give it a chance. We end up hurting our own progress, if you will.
Well, we just shrink ourselves. We reduce
Right.
what we could be.
Exactly. So, again, I find this to be a fascinating topic, and I found it even more fascinating after looking at it with the links that you sent me, especially on the breakdown of the Patterson film, which I just never looked at it that closely. And I think if people do look at it more closely, they'll see what I saw today, which is that that's not a suit. I don't believe that's a suit at all. I don't think they can make a suit that today. So
today people have tried. Never. I mean, you might wonder, well, why in 53 years since then, why haven't we seen anybody successfully? Nothing has even come close to being able to replicate that. And what it is when people look at that, a lot of people, they're so used to the only thing they've ever seen walking upright in terms of a primate walking like that. Gorillas and chimps can walk upright briefly, but naturally and fluidly walking upright is a person. So the first thing that jumps out at you is the similarities, and you think, oh, that's a person in a suit. But then when you study it more than 20 seconds, you start to see the differences.
right.
They start to sink in, and then when you see analysts who home in on those differences and measure them and lay them out for you, then you realize, well, it can't be a person in a suit, so what the hell is it? And if you're persuaded that that is an example of a living, breathing, walking Sasquatch, then everything else I've been talking about flows logically from that. Because if she's real, then they're real. It's not just one creature.
So there are different. You said something about there are different camps as far as beliefs of what Sasquatch is, because I'm aware of a story by the Mormon Church, and again, it's not church doctrine. It's not going to be taught in the church, but I know there are Mormons who believe that Sasquatch exists and that he's Cain. And the reason for that is, if we go back to biblical times, Cain was cursed after he killed his brother Abel. And he was killed he was cursed with a mark, first off, and then the second curse is that the earth would never receive his blood. So what they took that to believe is that he could feel the pain of death, he just could never die because the earth will never receive his blood. And so there's a book called The Mormon Doctrine, and one of the church leaders, I don't recall who it was, but he talks about coming upon this 8-foot or giant of a man while he's on his horse. Like the 1800s, he's on his horse, and this creature was as tall as he was sitting on his horse. And so, and this creature talked to him, said, I'm Cain, and this is the whole thing. I wasn't able to die. And so I don't know, that's the gist of the story. So there's that camp that they believe that that's what Bigfoot is. And again, that's not that. I don't want anyone to sit there and go, the church doesn't believe that. I'm not saying that's church doctrine. I'm saying there are people within the church who believe that. And the story is actually recorded in one of the books called Mormon Doctrines. That is a book that the church, adheres to. So.
Yeah, and you don't know. I mean, there's a lot of Christians who are Sasquatch researchers, and some of them believe that the Sasquatch is either literally the Nephilim from the Bible, or is some sort of offshoot from the Nephilim in the Bible.
The Nephilim, I'm not familiar with that.
Are the product of fallen angels reproducing with women, with mortal women. Okay. And they create the Nephilim. And there's not really many lines in the Bible about them, but that's, and so, but then you start to realize, well, it's a chicken and egg kind of thing, because maybe ancient people saw and knew of this species, and then their stories became melded onto that, rather than the other way around. You know, rather than the story being a reliable index of the history of how this hairy species came to be. Maybe this hairy species was there, and then it fed into the stories.
Right.
It was like retrofitting the recognition of the concrete, brutal reality of the species. But there's really no physical evidence that the Mormon Genesis possibility or the biblical Genesis possibility for this species is true. And there's tons of physical evidence that relates to Sasquatch species, like the muscles and everything that you saw, and the genetic results that Melba Ketchum was able to arrive at, that puts it into an evolutionary tree of our near primate relatives.
Yeah, and I
Tons of physical evidence there, and really just speculative linkages to these ancient stories and assertions that are in the Bible or the Book of Mormon, or etc.
I was just wondering if you had other camps, that, like you said, that as far as what they believe Sasquatch is, and
There's
and
a camp
whether,
that thinks that they are of extraterrestrial origin, that there's been genetic manipulation of our genome by the star people, and that the Sasquatch were created as kind of laborers um, back in the day. And this has also spawned the idea that the Sasquatch are the watchers, to watch over human beings and report back to the star people.
yeah, well, that makes sense. Since I know there's a camp that believe that we're here because of aliens or
Yeah,
extraterrestrials, and that
Eric Van Daniken and the ancient astronauts.
that's an interesting concept. It really is.
Yeah, but as far as Sasquatch, I don't know of any physical, again, evidence of that connection. It's really just a speculation. Could be true, and they could be the Nephilim from the Bible. What do I know? I'm
Right.
just into the evidence I'm aware of.
Right.
Uh, I lean more toward a naturalistic explanation that embraces evolution, which also has a mountain of evidence in its favor.
So, what do you, if you don't mind me asking, what do you do for a living?
My day job is as an editor of people's books, and that's
Okay.
kind of handy, because when I audio tape and then I have to listen in real time, because some of the important sounds on there don't appear in the spectrograph spikes. So you have to listen through the entire thing, and I can edit books while I'm listening. And the last 2 years, I've listened to more than 500 hours of audio from the forest. And 99% of that is just ordinary forest sounds. So it's all the more thrilling when you come up to a non-human scream at 3:15 in the morning, or a drum riff of percussion that no other animal could possibly make. But it really is. It's like panning for gold. It's very, very labor intensive and time consuming. That's why most people don't do it.
Right. So, do you see
You
yourself
have to
doing
listen
this
to
for?
500 hours to come up with a little handful of good audio clips that I have.
So, with that in mind, knowing that it is labor intensive, do you see yourself continuing to do this for years to come, or I mean, does the frustration get to you to the point where you're like, oh, I'm done with this, or
I'm in it for the long haul. I figure the third time's the charm. I've had two Sasquatch in my video lens, and didn't realize it in order to maximize the moment. I think the third time that happens, I'm going to darn well notice that he's there, and I'm going to get better footage than the Patterson film, and that will convince a swath of people, but not everyone.
right?
But it will satisfy me.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be more important than anything. Whether anyone else believed it or not, you would be satisfied knowing that this
I mean, I
culmination.
already know they exist. That's why I don't, when people say, do you believe Sasquatch exists? I always push back on that, because
15 years ago.
belief is thinking something in the absence of evidence. whereas I know they exist because there's sufficient evidence.
Right.
You know, I've never seen one with my eyeballs. I've only videotaped them, so I'm still a virgin in that regard. But I've never seen nitrogen with my eyeballs either. But I understand that it exists based
Right.
on everything converging around letting me know that nitrogen exists. And so, same thing with this.
So do you think, and this may not even be an interest to you, do you think that you'll find a love interest while you're doing this? Do you think that you're so consumed with what you're doing that it'd be hard to find a woman who understands your passion for this, or?
It would be pretty tough to fall for me if you weren't also fascinated by Sasquatch. But I don't spend much time every day lamenting being single, because I've already reproduced. I'm like one of those salmon that's swimming back upstream where it was born. You know, all kind of the skin falling off and
Right.
kinds of, you know, heading back to the happy hunting grounds.
There you go. And so, so you're still traveling the continent? I mean, is it?
No, it was a funny thing. It's a funny thing because in the beginning, when I first learned that you could go on these expeditions, I went all around North America. But then it was a full circle thing. I found out that they were in the ravine where I used to go as a 14-year-old. And I always thought they were in the Northwest, the great Northwest. But turns out they're in Vermont too. So since then, I've just really focused on local research. Also for many years I was in touch with and getting firsthand testimonials from people at habituation sites. Remember we talked about Jane
Right.
Goodall and how, but in the case of Sasquatch, it's just these places where Sasquatch tend to return, and people often trade with them. But not directly. It's all an indirect kind of interaction and conversation, like with objects. Like people will leave out pretty stones, and they'll come back, and there'll be a different pretty stone there, and one of theirs taken. Or there's a woman that I love to refer people to because she's been doing long-term communication through objects with her local Sasquatch group in Ohio, and her YouTube handle is Snow White Bigfoot. So she's got like 110 hours of documentation of her project, her experiment with communicating with her local Sasquatch. And she's recorded them, the audio of them at night, but she hasn't seen them. And at night they come, and they when she puts cameras up, they don't come. So go figure.
Yeah.
But they're obvious, their presence is obvious by inference and by indirection by what they do. Like she'll put 3 dice out right flush together with the 6s on top, and the next morning she'll see that one of them has a 3 on top instead of a 6. It's that clever.
So when you say when she puts cameras out, does she ever put them out and hide them, or does that matter?
You guys should see, I have a video called Sasquatch Up Close and Personal, in which I go through my my great heartache, which was, the year before I tried to hide a camera in this forest, I heard this one Sasquatch drumming and knocking every single morning when I would go there, but it was behind a thick screen of trees. And I didn't rush him because I didn't want to ruin the trust relationship that I was trying to build. And yet, ironically, the very next spring, I had been dreaming up this thing all winter of hiding a camera. So I bought a little bullet cam and drilled a hole in a fallen tree and hid it in there absolutely as immaculately and ingeniously camouflaged as you could possibly do. And I buried a 150-foot audio and electrical cable in a little trench, all 150 feet with a hatchet. I made a trench and I buried it. And then concealed on my own side of this cable was where I would come and plug in the battery pack and plug in the video to my laptop so I could watch it. But there was no longer any knocking. And believe it or not, and this is in that video too, Sasquatch Up Close and Personal, the moment I gave up on this whole project in late summer, early fall, and I pulled out all these cables, but I left an audio recorder back running just for the hell of it. and you can hear the cables being pulled away and me crunching away through the leaves and the twigs. And as the cables recede, you hear two distinct wood knocks. It blew my freaking mind. You know, he was acknowledging, yes, I have had to be quiet because he's trying to film me. And now that you're leaving. And then when I went there the next time, there's all sorts of knocking back again.
Right.
It was unbelievable. And I mean, it just shows you the level of their awareness and their consciousness. I mean, they're on top of things much more. And this too goes back to either they don't exist, in which case, blah, 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 all that stuff is dismissed, or they do. And if they do, they could only have done it by being far better at what they do. And part of that, a huge part of that, is the level of their awareness. We just can't even though I went through that whole experience with the hidden camera, even I keep having to remind myself of that, and just because you can't really get your arms around how aware they are. You know, it's kind of too much to conceive of.
Yeah, because I can tell you humans wouldn't be able to be that aware of cameras,
No.
especially if you hit it like that. So if it was a human out there making these noises,
Oh my God.
I would think you would see them, you know,
They'd have to be there. They'd have to happen to be there. And
Right.
and when there be this knocking and drumming in the mornings, people say, well, it was another guy or another researcher just fucking with you. Well, then what I say is that, okay, so the same guy or the same researcher would have also been there for years in the middle of the night when I recorded knocks and tree pushes in the same forest. So he was really just playing the long game with me. He was doing all that.
Yeah.
Just in case 3 years later I would, you know, whatever. So it's ridiculous. People try to justify and rationalize these things because, again, they don't want to take them on board in any kind of sincere way.
Well, I'm fascinated with your research, with your work, and all that you've come up with, and I definitely, Chris, would love to have you back on the show. And that third time, that's a charm. And you
Yeah. Wait till I get the next Patterson film. That might happen tomorrow or in 25 years, but we'll talk again if that happens.
We'll definitely talk again. But yeah, I'd love to have you on again in the future, and see where your work's gone and what you've come up with in the meantime. And anything that you find that's come across that you think is worthy, please feel free to contact me, and I'd love to share that with everybody and keep them up to date with what's going on. And even if you have it with if it's any of the other researchers and they come up with some amazing footage or whatever that for whatever reason isn't getting
the notice it deserves.
Yeah, exactly. Let me know. I'll have you on the show, and we'll get it out there. Okay.
Well, speaking of cynicism versus skepticism, I really appreciate you, Kurt, for being skeptical but not cynical.
Yeah, I don't believe cynicism benefits us.
Doesn't get you anywhere, does it?
Yeah, it doesn't, and I wish people would realize that, and because it stops our own growth, it stops our own evolution of seeing things that we won't be able to see if we're cynical. We just and we miss out on a lot when we do that.
Amen, brother.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking this time out today to join me and share your experiences, because it's been a fun show, and I had a great time, and Joe Rogan's not right. Again, I think he was just joking because he spent so much time out there himself, or so he says that he spent time out there looking, and I think he's like me. He really wants to believe. He just didn't find enough evidence that that convinced him. And
you kind of look like Joe Rogan. I think you're the up and coming new Joe Rogan.
Yeah, that's why I say I'm the better looking Joe Rogan.
There you go.
The smarter Joe Rogan. He's certainly
he's a fourth major, though.
He is, and he's a much better interviewer than I am right now, because I'm just starting, but I'll get up there with him. I admire the guy. He's a great guy. From what I can see, I don't know him personally, so but just say, if anybody wants to think about it, just think the better looking Joe Rogan. That's me. You
should call your podcast that. It would get more legs.
Oh yeah, well the thing is I want to be able to make it on my own merits. I want
Yeah,
people to come. I want people to come see me because, again, even though I love the way he does his show and he's great. That's him. And for me, I want to be, I want to be me, and we're not exactly alike. Even though I will tell you, we're both in the MMA, but I'm older than him, so I was in it before he was. So,
he only got into it because of you.
yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
but I love the fact that he, the archery thing. If I want to get into it, but I'll do it because of him. Because not because he does it, but because he got me excited about it. Like when he talks about it, it makes me want to do it. And so and go hunting and stuff. And who knows? Maybe one day I'll be out hunting and I'll see a Bigfoot and I'll call you and go, Chris, guess what I saw?
That's what I saw. And not only that, I took out my phone, and this is incredible. I will kiss you on your bald head if you do.
That's a deal. Well,
Yeah.
listen, thank you very much for joining me. It was a pleasure, and we'll talk again. And folks, thanks for joining us today. Have a good one. Until next time, take care.